What's lonelier than reaching the top alone? Climbing up isn't so bad, feeling like a solitary ghost. But when you plant your feet on that sacred ground and look around, all you can see is the endless.
Today, we are going to talk about the Hermit, card that's very dear to both of our hearts. I am a Virgo, and Mel has like
three planets in Virgo. Yeah.
Yep. I also have Mercury exalted in Virgo, and Virgo is very important to us, in short. The first thing that we usually do is talk about titles associated with the card. In this case, well, of course, we have many variations on the Hermit, always have in many languages, dating back to the earliest tarot decks. I've also seen the priest, the old man, Il Gobbo, which means the hunchback. And I saw there are some really nice references to the Hermit, not just as a mercurial figure, but as like a Saturnine or time or Chronos figure. So I saw one reference where he was called the Rerum Edax, the devourer of things, which I think is really beautiful. If I ever get a dog, Rerum Edax.
That'd be hard to call him.
Yeah, it would be really hard.
If I get another dog, I'll name him Belvedere so that I can do the famous cartoon call.
I don't know.
Oh, Belvedere, come here, boy.
Nice. Okay.
That's my impersonation.
All right. And the Hermetic titles are Magus of the Voice of Light and
that's not the
Prophet
ones
of the
I
Gods.
have.
Oh, really? What do you
I have the Prophet of the Eternal.
Prophet of the Eternal. Okay.
And the Magus of the Voice of Power.
Hey, but what's the Hermetic title of the Magus? Because that's
It's
Voice
very,
of Power, right?
No,
Or
the
something.
Magus of Power.
The Magus of Power.
And the Magus of the Voice of Power.
So it's like one step removed.
Yeah, and that's something that I figured we would end up talking about because
Right.
I see obvious connections between these two cards.
Yes, there's loads of connections between these cards. And in fact, I don't see why we can't just get right into it since we're speaking of Mercury and the Magician.
So for the titles anyway, though, so I always like to try to think, well, what are they trying to say with these Hermetic titles? When I hear the Prophet of the Eternal, it makes me think of time and the Saturn connection, even though this is a card of Virgo, but there's still a Saturnine element to it. And that comes in from the element of Earth. This is the most refined form of Earth. So it's like the final form of Earth. And when you think of Earth, you think of the card of the universe, which is both Earth and Saturn.
Right.
So,
Right.
and then we got Magus of the Voice of Power. So if we could jump in and start talking about the connections between the Magus and the Hermit.
And the Hermit, because of course the most obvious connection is that the Hermit corresponds to Virgo and Mercury is the ruler of Virgo.
And Mercury is the Magus, in case you
And
haven't
Mercury-
listened to that episode
the
yet.
Magus or the Magician. So that's episode 1. So yeah, and not only is Mercury the ruler of Virgo, he's also exalted in Virgo. It's his happy place. So
Right, so he's, and there are definitions of what it means to be exalted or in rulership of a sign on the podcast pages for subscribers. There's all sorts of extra content like that in case you perhaps don't know all the astro lingo.
And that's at www.patreon.com/fortuneswheelhouse. It's a great reference, so be sure to check out anything you're not quite sure about.
So anyway, back to the Magus and the Hermit. If you look at the Tree of Life at the path, now we'll get into talking exactly about the path later, but one thing that's noticeable is that the Hermit's path is at this diagonal that goes from Hesed to Tiferet, and it's at this this diagonal angle. If you look above the tree, that diagonal angle is mirrored in the path of the Magus, which goes from the first Sephirah of Keter to Binah.
So it's like they're
So
two sides of a parallelogram.
You're right.
We're both like tilting our hands to the
Yeah,
side.
you can't see this, but we're both making strange gestures here. So And so not only is it like that same angle, but the other thing that strikes me is that Hesed is considered like the Keter of below the abyss. So it's the first Sephira below those three supernals up above. So, I've often thought of the fours, four being Hesed, as being the aces of the material world. Again, so you have from the first to the, next path down. It's kind of like a mirror image. The Hermit is like the refined Magus card, and which the Magus is actually one step from the Fool. So I look as the Hermit as on the Fool's journey. He starts out as the Fool. He splits into one of the Magus, and then eventually in his most refined form, he's the old man further along in his journey. They're both, solitary wanderers, if you will.
And it's really interesting to think about. It's interesting to think about the Fool as a wanderer, as a traveler between worlds, because Mercury is a psychopomp figure, a figure who travels between this world and the world of the dead, or really pretty much any world he wants, above or below. And that is something that is particularly interesting, I think, in these two cards, because we see him traveling above to this mountaintop, but in the Thoth deck, there's Cerberus. He's traveling to the underworld. So, mountain or, reaching up for the divine above the earth, or traveling down beneath the earth.
Well, the path goes both ways. Either way, it's a slope. You're either going up it or you're going down it.
Yeah, and
what goes up must come down.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's maybe a difference in the way that Waite conceived it and Crowley conceived it, because Crowley really talks about Virgo as being the crust of Hades, as you say, that refined form of Earth.
Although, in a way, that you could look at it as, even in Waite's card, they're both facing the same direction.
They are.
They're both looking downward. So it's almost like they're both starting from and going down on that slope. And you could consider Waite's card as he's standing on the top of a mountain, rather than climbing a mountain and descending from there.
Right. So he's at the top, looking down, illuminating with his lamp. And as far as like sort of more common or mundane meanings of Virgo, I think that's meaningful to me, because, Virgo is always trying to shine a light in dark corners, always looking for the little things that everybody else misses. Sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes maybe not.
Someone's got to see the trees.
Someone's got to see the trees, exactly. Okay, so the Hermit's associated with Virgo, and then with the minors, that gives us the 3 Virgo minors, the 8, 9, and 10 of Pentacles or discs. They are the Lord of Prudence, the Lord of Gain, and the Lord of Wealth. They are such nice minors, and I'm biased, but I just love them.
I'm partial to them myself.
Yeah. So starting with so-called Prudence, the 8 of Pentacles or the 8 of discs, that's the Sun in Virgo.
The Sun ruling the decan of Virgo.
Yeah, the Sun, sorry. Yes.
I think it's an important distinction. For me it is. Saying the Sun in Virgo, to me, conjures up too much of the whole natal interpretations of the planets, whereas distinguishing by saying the decan itself ruled by that planet, it's almost like, I can see the similarities, but it's a different way of looking at it. It's a different way of
thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, so when we talk about the, a planet in a sign, when we're in the decans, we're talking about face. We're talking about the rulership of the decan by the planet.
Right.
So, if Venus rules the second decan of Virgo, it's not that Venus rules Virgo, and it's not exactly like Venus.
And it's not like transiting through Virgo as one of any of the 12 signs.
Right. There is that distinction, but yet
that facet of the sign Virgo that brings in that Venusian flavor, if it's Venus, or
exactly.
Well, actually,
So I guess, interpretationally, I've never been able to really separate planet in sign versus decan rulership.
It's not easy.
It's not easy, but I think the emphasis is on the qualities of the sign,
right,
primarily.
Right. It's more through the lens of the sign than the lens of the planet.
Yeah. I think that's true. It's just a slight flavor.
Right. I think the other way, natally, you're looking at the planet in the flavor of the sign, where this way you're looking at the sign, through the sign as the lens through which you're, rather than the planet as the lens through which you're interpreting.
Right.
I guess.
Right. I guess.
Or something
we
like
can
that.
try.
Yeah.
Anyway. So rather than thinking of this as the sun, the sun in Virgo and all the Virgo natives, we can think of this as like the sun ruling this one decan of Virgo. And so the qualities of Virgo are expressed in a solar way.
Right.
So perhaps a way to put it.
Right.
So what we have here is a card of prudence, the idea of, there's a purpose to this card. It picks up on the agricultural aspects.
Right. The sun warming the earth kind of as a picture of the fertility of earth,
Yes. And this is especially apt if you look at the delineation of this decan in the Picatrix, which is an ancient Arabic text that talks about the 36 decans. The first decan of Virgo is really particularly apt with prudence and with these cards, both in the Rider-Waite and the Thoth. There rises in the first face of Virgo a young girl covered with an old woolen cloth, and in her hand is a pomegranate. This is a face of sowing, plowing, the germination of plants, of gathering grapes, and of good living.
Nice.
Which is so nice, right?
Yep.
And I also love this idea of, in these decans of Virgo, you have a mix of the old and the new, and the young and the old, and the growth and the death. There's a Saturnian quality to them, and a quality of enclosure.
The harvest.
And harvest.
Right,
exactly.
the Saturnian,
yes.
the reaping of what has been
wearing
sown.
Old clothes, wearing rags, which is, my way of living, so I like that.
Likewise.
So there's this idea of, this first stage with prudence where you sow and where there's an emphasis on the agrarian side of Virgo.
And animal husbandry as well. So it's not just
too.
plant cultivation, but, the whole other side of the living equation to be husbanded and harvested.
Right, exactly. And then we have Venus in Virgo in the Nine of Discs, or the Lord of Gain. And this is really interesting to me because this is one of those situations where we have a planet that is normally in detriment in the sign, but ruling the face. And I once asked Austin Coppock about what happens when you do that. And so it's not that they cancel each other out, in his opinion, he said, but that you kind of get both. So you get some alleviation from the rulership, the dignity of face over the decan, but you still have, this planet that is not expressing itself as comfortably. The qualities of Virgo that come out, I think, are the perfectionism of Virgo, and the need to make it just right. That infuriating attention to detail. And, Venus here is expressing itself in a Virgoan way, or Virgo is expressing itself in the Venusian details, like saying, this is how my vision of beauty is going to be achieved, and I will not settle for less.
The beauty ideals.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so that has a certain, what is it? It's also called the Lord of Material Gain. So it's specifically expressing the arts in things, in creative
things that can be
things.
counted.
Yes. Yeah, things that can be appreciated and held in the hand.
Yes, the yod, the hand.
In the yod, hand,
right. The letter of Hermit.
Right. And to me, there's a tiny sort of signal of that in the Nine of Pentacles and the Waite Smith, where she's holding her hand up with the little bird on it. It's like, pay attention.
It's a falcon. It's not a little bird.
Oh, yeah. The idea and that's the ideal of control over every
he's
detail.
hooded.
He's hooded, and you cannot do falconry without immense control, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's interesting. And then we have
and she's got little Venus glyphs all over her dress.
And she's got little Venus glyphs all over her dress. I often think of her as one of the little, faces of the Empress.
Right. Well, she is, being Venus, the Empress.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Venus is saying hello through that. The Empress is saying hello in that picture just a little bit. And then we have the Lord of Wealth, and Mercury in Virgo. Mercury.
The Hermit of Hermits.
Yeah. Mercury is both in rulership and exalted in Virgo. And this decan is its degree of exaltation. So when we see a planet, ruling the decan in its degree of exaltation numerous times throughout the minors, That is one powerful card.
Yes, very much so. And being the final card of the minors, it's even more powerful because not only is it the end of a cycle, but it's that culmination of matter that has the ultimate descent that has nowhere to go but up, or as Crowley calls it, the redintegration of spirit.
And that's not us being drunk.
No.
That is actually the word. And what's great about this idea is that there's in the Thoth card, there's like a heaviness about it, like the coldness of coin and wealth, the idea that death and wealth
and
go
old
together.
age,
and
yes,
old age. And
right.
you see that in the Waite card as well, the old man as well as the young people.
Right. The Hermit, as it's the last decan of the Hermit being a symbol of age, and there's Saturn again in a sense.
The harvest and the scythe and the reaping.
Right.
So there's like this finality in the third decan of this mutable sign where things are finished, and then you can reinvest them and feed people with the proceeds, but there is a death as well. Yeah. Which it's not something people usually read into the Ten of Pentacles, but it's there.
One thing I always consider with this card is there's wealth that's accumulated over time, and then there's Saturn again, and it's built and it's built and it's built. It's, what Crowley says of the card is at some point it ceases to become wealth if you don't spend it.
Right.
You can't hoard it forever, and that you have to use it to further your spiritual goals, if you will. So then again, that's back to the return of spirit, which if you go all the way back around to the end of the small cards, what do you come to but the Ace of Wands?
Right.
Right.
So the dead fruit becomes the seed.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I think since there's so much Mercury symbolism and there's so much connection between Mercury and Virgo, why don't we start looking at Mercury symbolism?
Okay.
Next.
Sure.
Let's dive right into the Thoth, where it's everywhere.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of direct Mercury references in the Waite Smith card, other than the color of his robe being gray, which is one of the colors
Gandalf.
of Mercury. Yes,
Mercury Gandalf.
Thou shalt not pass. But in the other card, we can certainly find some Mercury references. The eight-sided lamp that he carries would be one.
So an 8 being the number of Mercury because the 8th Sephira, Hod, is associated with Mercury.
And then Cerberus himself is a reference to Mercury and his psychopomp function, the guide of souls.
Right.
Through hell, which there's some interesting things about that. So, Cerberus is the three-headed hound. And if you look at the three heads, there's 2 facing forward and 1 facing behind. And so it makes me think again of Saturn and the function of time, the past, present, and future.
Present, and future. I like that.
Moving through time. And then another Crowley refers to the Cerberus figure as meaning mastery of speech, actions, and thought. And so that's part of what the Hermit's path is all about. Mastery of speech, actions, and thought. And it's a path of silence. And part of mastering speech is to know when to, remain silent.
Right. We also have another Virgo reference in the wheat all over the Crowley card and back. And that, of course, refers also to the Demeter Persephone myth of the traveling back and forth.
And the meaning of the word hell, so it comes from a word that means the concealed place. And I think that's really interesting because there's some titles that are associated with the Hermit. The Hermit has a lot of titles that are associated with Keter, and one of them is the concealed of the concealed. And there's also some references that, so you always see him carrying this lantern or this lamp and illuminating things with light, but also there's the concealed light that's said to be within him under his robe in his heart. So there's a conceal, I don't know. So when I hear hell being about, the concealed place, it makes me think of the light within.
Another thing I was thinking about was about this whole sort of mountain versus underworld thing is that Mercury rules 2 signs. There's the air sign, Gemini, and the earth sign, Virgo. So that's another sort of reference to his duality and his ability to go in opposite directions because air and earth are elementally opposite.
I think of it as, Mercury here in Virgo being the perfected Mercury. Alchemically, it's the more refined version because it's the mutable sign.
Yes,
of the earth signs, it's the mutable earth sign.
Right, and that's why when we look at the 10 of Pentacles, so the 8, 9, and 10 of Pentacles or coins are associated with Virgo, the last of the elements being earth, and the last of those 3 deckhands being in Virgo being associated with mutable earth, the last 3 of earth. So you get this feeling of sort of concretization and heaviness and earthiness with that. I don't remember where I saw this, but that sperm in the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about that.
That's
more
a really
with.
cool one.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was, now who said this? I don't know if it was Duquette or Snuffin, but they referred to it as a homunculus. And it's from an old illustration of the 1600s that showed if you look really carefully, if you get out your card or your magnifying glass, you can see that there's a little infant, a fetal infant. So he's got a little diamond on his head. See that? And that's his skull. And then he's curled up holding his knees. See how it's like a curl?
Oh, yes, I see it. I see it. Oh my God, it looks like a Pokemon or something.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be a fetus curled up, and it's supposed to be from this illustration of the homunculus. But what's really cool, I think, is when I first looked at it, before I saw the fetus figure, it looks like a skull as well. It looks like it's a skull with like a round, diamond on its head.
I see it.
Isn't that weird?
I see it.
And it makes me think of this sperm-like figure is somewhere. I think it was in one of Crowley's writings. It's referred to the snake of life, whose knowledge also brings knowledge of death. Within birth comes death.
Right, so the death's head within the sperm.
So I don't know if that death's head is really meant to be there, but
I don't know. I've also
sure
seen
looks
people
like
say it looks like a caduceus. So, it's sort of like symbols are for everybody again.
And then the diamond on his head, that's a 4-sided thing. It makes me think of,
Chesed.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And another reference to Keter. There's a lot. So while this path doesn't involve Keter, there's a lot of Keter symbolism in this card because of the letter Yod. And we should probably talk about that at some point because there's a lot to talk about there as well.
Yeah, I think we'll do that next. I just wanted to also say that, sperm related to fertility, Hermes as in some cases can be a fertility god.
Yeah, isn't that strange?
It's
It's
so
the
weird.
sign of the Virgin, Virgo the Virgin, and yet the letter, it means sexual love.
Right.
And it's the secret seed and the
secret
fertilizing element. And so it's
and the harvest.
It's both virgin and fertile at the same time, which is really cool.
Which is really cool. It's something that's just, profound to this card, that it's really hard to reconcile these opposites sometimes, but they're always in there, and they're always something that you have to look out for. I mean, especially Virgo comes, at least in the northern hemisphere, at a time when we harvest everything. It's sort of like, okay, well, everything is ripe and ready.
Yeah, it's the
but
sign
also
associated
it's gonna
with
die.
food. That's
Yeah.
You see the Knight of Discs there, and he's
Exactly.
in a cornfield. He looks more like a farmer than a warrior because he's carrying like a grain flail or something.
Right.
Oh,
And-
speaking of Mercury references, I just thought of another one in the Thoth card, which is, look at his head. That's actually the head of an ibis. See the long beak?
Sorry, where?
Look at the head. His
The
head.
head. Oh, yes.
It's an ibis,
Whoa.
which is Thoth. Or
Really?
Toth, or
Wow.
Tote, or
Yeah.
Tot, or
Okay, so he is.
however you want to say
So
his name. So I thought there's another Mercury.
I just thought she doesn't like drawing faces very much.
Well,
so.
she apparently she admittedly in her writings admitted that she doesn't like
It's
Mercury time.
I have a app on my phone that does that. So when you hear it, that means it's the planetary hour of Mercury on today, which happens to be Saturday. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I think there's one of her letters. There's letters between her and Crowley, and she says something about. She either says something about not liking to draw faces, or he's responding to the fact that she doesn't like to draw faces, and basically he tells her that that's a weakness.
I hope she told him to go screw himself.
She probably did.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Orphic egg, these themes of
the Orphic egg. Now we
and-
have to talk about the Orphic egg, but before we
Yeah.
do that, well, what do you want to talk about first? The egg,
There's so much in
the
here.
egg or the yod?
Okay, I guess
Which
we
are
should,
associated with each other.
which
anyway,
are
but
associated
anyway.
with each other.
Yes.
So I guess we really should go into the Kabbalah stuff now. So
It's
yeah.
hard not to.
And actually, Mel, so the Hermit is associated with the letter Yod, right? But here's the thing. So we have two letters in the Hebrew alphabet that mean hand, basically. And we were talking about this on the Magus card, I think, where the fist was related to Kaf.
Kaf is not just
it's-
the fist, it's the
it's the
palm
open
and the
hand.
fist. It's both. Because
Okay.
it's the wheel. We'll get to it when we talk
Yeah,
about
we'll
the
get
wheel,
to
but
it.
it's that action of opening and closing that drives the wheel. So it's palm,
Okay.
fist, palm, fist,
fist.
palm, fist, over and over perpetually.
But the Yod is supposed to be the working hand, the closed hand, the hand that points,
Or the hand of
So
manifestation.
it's not just that it's, when it's not just which side of the hand and it's not just open versus
I kind
closed.
of always looked at it as the yod was the hand itself, whereas the kaf hand is more the action of opening and closing the hand. It's
So
more
it has
more
to
an
do with the
active
verb,
and
the motion.
a motion where this is more a solid the hand, where that is more the motion of the hand. But that's just the way I've always kind of
Yeah, I mean,
reconciled that in my mind.
last night, this is why I was up so late last night. So I was freaking out about these two kinds of hands and not understanding them. So I chatted up on Facebook a friend of mine who went to rabbinical school, and and he talked to me a little bit about the open hand versus the closed hand, and the idea that the open hand is like the receiving hand, the hand that is more passive, the hand that is. Let me just.
The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away.
Which makes some sense for the. I just got to bring up what he said because it was really helpful. I'm like, help! Okay. So, all right. So he said, in my understanding, this is my friend Hamza, Yud is the forceful fist kind of letter, and Kaf is more like a Hamza, which is, the open hand averting
palm.
evil, blessing and receiving and holding. However, on the tree of life, Kaf is on the pillar of force, right? And Yod is on the pillar of form. So there's that, and the pillar of force sends, and the pillar of form receives. So there's really kind of a cross, I don't know, pollination or a blending of meanings between the two. I don't know if that's any clearer at all, but it just kind of adds more into the mix. And he says that also that the Kaf has more of a protective association in his mind because it literally means palm. It's the same word that they use for the branch of a palm tree with its protective shading functions. So, we'll talk about it more when we get to the wheel, but there is that idea of Jupiter as the greater benefic and its protective functions. So anyway, so Yod is even more significance because it's the first letter of the Tetragrammaton, right?
Right. And that's where it gets its hidden seed terminology, one of the places, because the Yod is said to be the first letter not the first letter, but what all letters are, the shape of it is what all the letters are derived from. So
Right.
it's part of all 22 letters.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is said to be associated with both Keter and Hakma. So it resides, somewhere in Hakma, but the tip of it begins in Keter.
Because it has that curly comma shape.
Yeah, the very tippy, the pointy part at the top is said to be the point, Keter, the point from which all things first manifest. So when you look at the divine name of the Tetragrammaton, the Yod actually begins in Keter, but is actually Hakma, in its first force. That first spark of that creates the whole universe through the word of, the divine name begins at that point. And that's one of the names of Keter is the point.
And also the Hermit's shape in the Thoth card is like a Yud. That's
In
deliberate.
both cards,
In
actually,
both,
they have that
really, yeah.
pointy, he's got the
He's
pointy
got the pointy
hood.
in the weight card.
You can
yeah.
kind of see the shape in both cards of that curvy, flame-like shape.
Right.
Another connection, I think, between the this card and the wheel card, the number of the letter Yod is 10. And if you spell out the number, if you spell out the word Yod, then the number is 20, which is the number of Jupiter. So it's kind of like a funny little...
if you spell out Yod?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then you get 20, which is
Yod,
the number
Vow, Daleth adds
yeah.
up to 20, so it's a number of Jupiter, so that's kind of interesting. But anyway, one more thing about, that the way that tip goes from Keter to Chokmah, that's the path of the Fool. Yes. So that's another connection between the Fool and the Hermit. So the Hermit as being like the evolution of the Fool in a sense.
Yeah, and they have that same posture, that same positioning in the weight card at the top of a mountain. Yeah, and that same gaze. Well, it's interesting because now it's like in the weight card, it's like whereas the Fool was staring off into nothingness, the Hermit has a regard. He's looking at something. He's looking down. He's looking at where he came from.
Right.
Yeah. Again, we'll delineate this or highlight this more clearly on the Tree of Life diagram on the website, but you can really see that upper right to lower left direction throughout both cards from
there's even on the Thoth card, there's the path is kind of illustrated by that beam of light that is higher than the rest of the beams that's from the upper right and kind of goes through the sun there. So.
And that's from Chesed to Tiferet.
It looks like it's illustrating the path.
It looks like it's illustrating the path, and so the sun itself would represent Tiferet in the center of the tree, and then the light would come from Chesed above.
Notice those strange kind of shapes that aren't part of the light coming from the lantern as well.
Right.
I think Snuffin said that.
Snuffin says it's a yud.
I think it was Snuffin. Maybe it was somewhere else that's a pyramid and a horizon.
Oh.
So you can kind of see that
nice.
actually. See the triangular part.
Yeah.
Looks like you can see like two sides of the pyramid. See the two different colors, like where his back is one color and the wheat behind him. So it kind of looks like the two sides of a pyramid, which ultimately has four sides. So is probably another Hesed,
reference to Chesed.
Reference, and then the horizon line that is kind of going across the card diagonally. Yes, it was Snuffin, and guess what he called the pyramid?
A phallic symbol?
Yeah, okay, of course he did.
Okay, so while we're on the subject as usual, so here's the quote from Book of Thoth. In this trump is shewn the entire mystery of life in its most secret workings. Yod phallus spermatozoan hand logos virgin. I mean, he just like free associates at the end on all his favorite subjects, not even bothering with the verb. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, indeed. So can we just like speculate? Let's talk a little bit about what that might mean that it runs between Chesed mercy and Tiferet beauty. What that means interpretively for the card. I mean, we're gathering, I guess, the light of the Father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the first place where the light that originated in Keter ends up below the abyss for the first time in Hesed. And so that spark of light is being carried down to the card of the sun or the sun, or depending on how you spell it. Either way is relevant.
Right. So that lends a little bit more spin onto, from father to son, the idea of this spermatozoan, the secret seed that goes from one to the other.
And the secret seed is, you can also think of that as if you think of a fertilized egg, that point in the center of a membrane, which is the glyph of the sun.
Yes.
And that there's another like Hadith reference, the secret seed, that beginning that light within us.
Yeah. And it just seems to me that, when I see this card, I do tend to think about, what is handed down from one to the next, from one generation to the next, the thing that you have to examine closely because you didn't bring it yourself. You have to learn it, like, bring those Virgo tools of dissection and analysis to bear so that you can accept the gifts of the people who came before you. And to me, that's sort of intimately bound up in this generation or donation of light from Chesed to Tiferet.
The carrying of the torch.
The carrying of the torch. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say.
The perpetual lamp of the Vestal Virgin.
Yes. We should just talk about that lamp a little bit, don't you think?
Well, what can we say? I mean, it makes me think of, like I said, the ever-burning lamps. I mean, supposedly there were ever-burning lamps in ancient times that were said to burn forever, but maybe not forever, but some of them were said to actually burn for hundreds of years. They'd place them lit into tombs, and they were formulated such so they would just burn at such a slow rate that without a breeze down there in the tomb, but just enough oxygen to keep burning, that when some of these tombs were opened hundreds of years later, supposedly there's witnesses that said until we opened the tomb, that was still burning, and then a gust of breeze comes and puffs it out and or whatever, and it's like long. So it makes the ever burning, and so that brings in again that association with Hades and the underworld again.
Right. Now we have what appears to be a 16-pointed star in the Thoth lamp, which I guess
double eight, or didn't we determine that 16 was a number of fire and sulfur?
Did we?
Oh, you know what Crowley calls that? The sun in the lamp, he calls it the sigil of the Fire King.
I think he just meant that's like a sun. You know,
right.
I think he was being...
Well, you know, it's kind of, this is an earth card, not a fire card, yet there's a lot of solar symbolism with it. And, you know, the sun and the fire and all that. And it's a whole interplay between the fertility of earth is because the sun warms the earth. And so there's a lot of interplay between earth, sun, Mercury in this card. So that brings in a lot of fire.
Yeah, and also so the weight card, we have a 6-pointed star, which is a direct reference
to solar Tiferet.
Tiferet with the 6th Sephira, as above, so below, with those interlocking fire and water triangles. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And also the lamp, though. Another thing about the lamp, mythically, is that sometimes people read into this card a connection with the myth of Diogenes. You know, the myth of Diogenes, the idea that this philosopher who was like, I don't know, one of the cynics, Greek cynic philosophers, would pull this stunt where he would like take his lamp out in the middle of the daytime and people would ask him, what are you doing? He's like, I'm looking for an honest man. And he never finds one.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the sort of...
Good luck with that.
It's the unending quest for truth of Virgo, never knowing when to stop.
For purity. That's for purity.
Quest for purity.
The Virgo and ever quest for purity. And then the whole the lamp thing, I also thought of the Fanes light bringer.
Oh, yeah.
Born from the egg. So that brings in the egg in the Crowley's card, that egg that the hermit is apparently obsessed with there. He's focused right on it. And so there's we could talk a little bit about the Orphic egg. And
one more thing before we go on to the egg is that in Marseille decks or in older versions, you sometimes see, instead of the lamp, you see an hourglass. And that, of course,
another
is a Saturn,
Saturnine
Chronos time.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Saturn reference in these cards as well.
Okay, so the egg.
The egg. One thing that's, interesting about the egg symbolism, so you see that a lot in alchemy, but you also see that symbol with the egg, with the serpent around it. One of Crowley's Liber LXV is the heart girt with the serpent. Okay. And if you think of what a heart looks like, it's kind of like an egg-like oval shape, and then it has the serpent around it. And that's all about the quest to, how it's basically the how-to guide for your Holy Guardian Angel contact. So in that, the Holy Guardian Angel is compared to an endless serpent around the heart of Tiferet.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's like the serpent of Kundalini
serpent
that wakens, that raises Osiris in the sense that we are the Osiris and we are dead until we're awakened to the knowledge of our Holy Guardian Angel. That raising of the dead is symbolic for awakening. So that's one thing that the egg could be referring to, but there's probably lots of other things as well.
Right. There's just Eros and Thanatos, fertility and death everywhere.
Yeah. And it also brings in another kind of Keter reference in the Ein Sof, the oval that surrounds the tree that you see from which Keter came out of. Those oval forms are said to be like an egg. It's like, I think I referred to as, so there's man's auric egg, and then there's the cosmic egg, which is that which Keter arose out of.
Right.
said to be like the auric egg of God, where man has his auric egg. This is the demiurge's auric egg.
Yeah.
And then the supreme achievement is supposed to be breaking the Orphic egg to return to nirvana and end the cycle of necessity.
Cosmic omelet. That was an alternate name for this podcast at one time.
There's certainly a lot of eggs in it.
Okay.
You know what? One more thing about the egg, though. So the egg, it's a container, right? It's sealed up. It's a container. It makes me think of this card as, a metaphor for this card, because the Hermit is kind of a card considered of solitude and of like sealing yourself off in order to gestate something, and you're maintaining silence during that time. Usually you're not out socializing. You're kind of going within on this inner journey, and it's kind of sealed off. And it's a 9, so that's the number of months in the womb. There's a lot of symbolism
in fact, we should
there.
talk about that too. And there's themes of secrecy that sort of permeate
secrecy
the
and
card.
silence.
Secrecy
And
silence.
the yod was the beginning of the word of God, the tetragrammaton that issued out of the silence.
And speaking of the 9, we should also maybe talk about the connections with the moon card, because the moon is number 18, of course, and it's connected with Pisces. So you have those opposites, Virgo,
Pisces axis,
Virgo, Pisces axis.
Yeah, the loaves and the fishes, the grain and the fish.
Nice.
Yes.
That's great. So, and it's interesting because there aren't that many cards, there aren't that many pairs of signs that reduce like that. So you have and that are also opposites. So there's only one other pair.
That's interesting.
Which is, hang on,
I gotta run them through my head.
It's not Aries, Libra, and
Aquarius.
That's,
is that it?
Well, technically, if you do 8 and 17, if you consider strength, Leo. So
that's why I didn't think of it. I was using the other one.
Well, and it's interesting because that, of course, is the place with the loops on both ends.
Yes.
But in terms of like opposites and numerical reduction, you have them both like cleanly in the Hermit and the Moon. So there are really, profound connections between the Hermit and the Moon, which you actually illustrate in Tabula Mundi beautifully, but which is not to be found explicitly in either of these cards.
I'll try to put up that card.
Yes, please do.
When we put up something for the subscribers.
Yeah. And also, the moon, number of the moon is 9.
And 9, we mentioned 9 as being birth, the number of months in the womb, but it's also a number of death because it's the last of the single digits. It's the number of completion, so it's got both ends of the spectrum there.
Mm-hmm.
So
and you thought the Hermit was just an old man. Let's see, numbers. We got the Virgo Pisces, the 918. We have the 8-sided lamp. Let's see. Oh yeah. So should we do color next?
Sure.
Okay. Let's hear it.
So obviously there's greens. I mean, you can pretty much tell looking at Crowley's cards. There's yellow green, there's gray green, and then there's the plum color of his robe, which he himself says refers to Binah in the princess scale. So plum in the princess scale is where the color of his robe comes from. And bringing in Binah is, of course, probably partially the Saturn influence on the card.
And as we were talking about earlier, we travel in order color-wise through the signs. So with Leo, we had greenish yellow,
and now we have yellowish green. It's the other end of the yellow.
Right.
Well, the same, just a little bit more green than yellow instead of yellow than green.
Also,
and then you have the colors of the Sephirot of the two. So you have the yellow of Tiferet. Obviously, there's a lot of yellow in the card, and then
the blue.
There's some blue for Hesed that you see there
or if you combine them, you get green.
Yeah.
If you like.
Yep.
Yeah. The greenish yellow is such a funny color. I think of it as
vernal,
and also, but having to do with like peridot, which is a Virgo stone. But also, to me, like when you illustrate poison, that's the color you use, and there's a reference to poison in the Book of Thoth. Which
I wasn't going to go there, but why don't you bring it up? Because I figured it would be so confusing.
It's so confusing and it's so weird, and other people have got to be confused. So why don't we talk about it? I'm going to just bring up the PDF of Book of Thoth so we can find that reference. When you read Crowley, a lot of the time you're just like, okay, he was high. But you know that there was something he was really trying to get at with the
Well, the more you read Crowley, the more you understand him, because he's not
Maybe
always,
you do.
He's not, well, the first time you read some of his writing, you don't have a clue what he's
that's
talking
true.
about. But
Yeah.
the more of you read, and he's so voluminous, there's so much of it, then you start seeing the interconnections that he's referring to that you wouldn't even be aware of unless you started to really immerse yourself in a lot of his stuff. So a lot of times he's kind of speaking in parables or
Yeah,
you know,
always.
he's,
I mean, he never speaks literally.
He's cross-referencing his own work, and he's cross-referencing mythology, and he just had an encyclopedic knowledge of almost everything.
Yeah. And it all came out, too, in the books. Okay, so he says these symbols are indicated by his serpent wand, which is actually growing out of the abyss. We didn't even talk about the abyss.
And there's the Binah reference.
And is the spermatozoon developed as a poison and manifesting the fetus. What the... So, I mean, I can sort of see serpent poison kind of
Yeah,
connection.
serpent poison, and then there's the whole, there's all those V words when you see his motto with all those V's, and one of the words, one of those V words, which one is it? Virus or something, refers to poison. So there's a lot to
Yeah. I mean,
consider
does
there.
it have to do with, I mean, is it the idea of poison as something that infects, that...
Well, I wonder if it's something to do with that whole the snake whose knowledge gives you knowledge of life, but also of death at the same time.
Yes,
you
and
know,
also
the death
this
inherent
is
in life.
associated with Mercury and the gift of knowledge and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so,
Yeah, there could be there could be something there. I mean, I may be wrong about that, but it certainly makes me think of that, and just the fact that in being born, death is already inherent. So in a sense, the sperm is a poison.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
So
like,
you're getting taken out of nirvana and incarnating here, knowing you're going to die,
Right,
and
with the
you
gift
have
of
to do
death.
it all over again if you
Right.
subscribe to that perpetual, that part
Right.
within us
Right.
that remains.
Right. And we do have so many of these polarities and contradictions in this card, life and death, and
Old age and birth.
Old age and birth, right.
Conception and old age.
And the idea of, I don't know, I also see knowledge as a blessing and a curse as well, to return to kind of a more hermit and hermetic view.
Yeah, this is a card of purification in a sense. Virgo itself being a sign of the virgin of purity, and this whole introspection thing that happens where you go within on this journey of discovery. I think it's a method of both purifying yourself and individuation, kind of,
Yeah. Okay. So there's a tradition that the 4 virtues are supposed to be indicated in the tarot deck. So that's temperance, fortitude or strength, justice. And then there's prudence, which is an issue because we don't have a prudence card. But there are those who say that the hermit is prudence.
Which makes sense, because if you look at the title of the minor card associated with it, it's Prudence, the 8 of Discs.
8 of Discs, Sun in Virgo,
Right.
Prudence.
And-
I've also seen the world associated with it, but for our purposes,
So it's kind of hidden in there, just like he's
Yeah.
the hidden light, he's the hidden seed.
the hidden seed, the
Yeah.
hidden virtue, the
Yep.
hidden cardinal virtue. And, that makes a certain sense when you think about it. The idea that, prudence is a virtue that you develop from going places and seeing things and having experienced life. And that's what Mercury does. He goes everywhere. And then the fool, develops on his
Right.
journey into
His
someone
maturity.
who starts out with the opposite of prudence to developing that quality over time. Okay, that's good. I'm glad that we got that. I think we're down to the little stuff. Okay, so yellowish green. So that's the color along the color scale is about, not quite at green, not at the
Yep.
full green of Venus. And I have heard that that's an F natural. So F natural for the hermit. And let's see, what else? Oh, yes. And it's time to take out some smells. So Agrippa, I double checked this last night, likes to associate what he calls red sanders with Virgo. But that, I think, is just a term for sandalwood, actually. So, or at least I'm assuming it is, because
I think I'm going to like the Virgo smells.
Yeah. Ooh, this is a bit sticky.
Earthy. I like the vetivers and the
Yeah.
all those.
So there's a pretty nice sandalwood. I have several of them, but this is the one I brought. Let's see. Oh, and I also have this blend which I use. I can't remember why, but Narcissus is also associated with Virgo. And I don't know whether it has to do with like that introspective quality of Narcissus in the myth where he falls in love with his own reflection.
Or maybe because he's so in love with himself, he remains a virgin.
Yes, there is like a sort of chastity associated with Narcissus that I think is probably
And the flower, it just looks, it's white and virginal looking. So
this is actually something, an accord I bought called Dark Narcissus, which I really like a lot. I use it in my Virgo perfume. It doesn't remind you of clean laundry or anything, but it does have a sort of floral purity to it, which I like. So those are the two I have for those. Let's see, anything else? Okay, so that is the Hermit. So long, Virgo. And adieu. And we shall be back next time with the Wheel of Fortune. Very exciting. So be sure to join us.